from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word, and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, September 4th, 2020. We are in the month that begins God's Fall Holy Days. We're going to talk about that in our program today. But we've got a lot to get to before we actually get into that. We're going to pick up where we left off last week, talking about the hurricanes that's coming through. And actually, it was the 15th anniversary this past Sabbath of Hurricane Katrina. We're going to tie that in today also. The Middle East is heating up again. It's got some very positive and also some very concerning negatives coming. We'll bring that in as we go through this. Lawlessness. We're going to begin today talking about some of the lawlessness that we've been seeing around the nation. We won't be able to get into everything, but I'd like to give you a little introduction to show you where we're going through, because I actually have a sermon about it this coming Sabbath. Then we're going to tie in the Middle East to our nuggets portion and the blowing of the shofar and its connection to the Feast of Trumpets. All right, let's begin our program with Labor Day. Every year we talk about Labor Day and beginning the fall season, and it's time to relax. Well, this year we got two videos for you that ties in labor to rest and God's Sabbath day. But before we get into those, let's take a look at the History Channel. It tells us a lot about Labor Day. Play that video. We'll be right back.
The Industrial Revolution modernized the United States and Canada during the 19th century. As people enjoyed steady employment, they compromised their rights in the workplace. Longer work hours and pay cuts were imposed. U.S. labor groups began protecting themselves by unionizing. In Canada, unions were illegal until 1872, when thousands of Ottawa laborers marched to Prime Minister John Macdonald's home. That year, Canada wiped the anti-union law from its books, and the march became an annual Canadian tradition. In 1882, Toronto labor officials invited an American union leader, Peter J. Maguire, to Toronto's labor celebrations. Maguire was so impressed that he suggested a workers' parade to New York City's Central Labor Union. He chose September 5th as the date because it filled the long void between July 4th and Thanksgiving. Coincidentally, that same year, a machinist from Paterson, New Jersey, Matthew Maguire, also proposed a laborers' celebration. On Tuesday, September 5th, 1882, thousands of New York City laborers marched from City Hall to Union Square. They gathered in Reservoir Park for an afternoon of picnics, concerts, and speeches rallying for an 8-hour workday. 2 years later, the Central Labor Union moved the parade to the first Monday in September. They also encouraged all U.S. cities to follow New York's lead and march for the working man's holiday. For many, the choice was to either spend the day at work or march without pay. That began to change when Oregon became the first state to legalize the Labor Day holiday in 1887. Other states, including New York, soon followed. It took a political disaster to put Labor Day on the national calendar. In 1894, railway workers in Pullman, Illinois went on strike to protest wage cuts. President Grover Cleveland faced pressure to end the demonstrations and sent 12,000 federal troops to break the strike. Violence erupted. 2 strikers were killed, and Cleveland's harsh methods made headlines. In an attempt to appease the nation's workers, he signed a bill to make Labor Day a federal holiday. Cleveland still lost that year's election. America's workers continued to gain power through the 1950s, when over a third of all labor forces were unionized. Labor Day had become a time to rally workers for safer conditions, fair pay, and benefits. But in the second half of the 20th century, the U.S. labor force diminished. Many factories closed. Jobs were outsourced to other countries. Today, workers still parade through blue-collar neighborhoods on Labor Day, and speeches unite the ever-dwindling labor force. But the day's true call has quieted. For now, most Americans leisurely enjoy the holiday as summer's last bow.
Down here in the South, you think about Labor Day, you think about hurricanes. We'll be talking about that later today. But I sure hope everybody gets a chance to be off on Monday, spend some time with your family, and enjoy the day and getting ready for the Feast of Tabernacles. You think about Labor Day down here in the South, you think about the hurricanes. As I remember even growing up as a young man in high school, thinking about the hurricanes that came through and shutting down the schools back then. So I hope everyone takes the time this week to be off of work and enjoy some time with your family as you get ready for the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, our first program, a mega church pastor, and what you're about to hear is true. I'm not making this up. It's consistent with Christianity for abortion, he's saying, and I will fight to keep it legal. Now, I don't know what goes through a person's head, especially supposedly a pastor of God's holy word, talking about abortion being consistent with God's holy word. It reminds me of Jeremiah where he says, "Woe to you pastors." Take a look at this story now. A pastor of a Georgia megachurch who also is running for U.S. Senate said last week that he believes legalized abortion is consistent with Christianity and he would fight to ensure that it remains legal. Raphael Warnock, senior pastor at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta with over 6,000 members, is the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. Absolutely amazing that this guy is a pastor and can say this. So now I want to ask the question here. Is abortion now considered normal health care? So according to this pastor, it is. Look what he says. Referencing his career as a minister in the public service, Warnock added, "I've been focused on women's health, women's choice, and reproductive justice, and that is consistent with my view as a Christian minister, and I will fight for it." Bryant was asked, "Do you think it's consistent with God's view that God endorses the millions of abortions that we've had in this country since Roe versus Wade?" Now this is his answer. Warnock responded, "I think that human agency and freedom is consistent with my view as a minister." All right, that's the answer. What is that? What is human agency? Think about it. Human agency. Doesn't that not sound like what the Pope's talking about? Humanism? Everything relating to the Bible is pushed out, and we're going to use everything according to humanism. So if we're talking about the rights of humans, the babies have none. That's what we're talking about here. But anyway, so if he's preaching it, so there you got a congregation of 6,000 people sitting there, has to accept it. That's normal. If they accept it, then it continues to spread across the nation. When it reaches that the pulpits completely accept abortion, there is no repentance. There is no repentance from going through any of this. And we become like Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, here we go. Can't make this stuff up. I think you're going to really enjoy this little piece. It's also kind of alarming when you think about it. Now, I went back, I'm going to put a little disclaimer before you actually see it. I went back to see if I can see anything here that maybe this was dubbed into because the technology is so today, but I couldn't find anything. So this was sent to me from one of our listeners down in Australia. So I want to share this with you now. Not too long. Take a look at it. 1956, a prophecy for 2020. Let's play that video.
When you think of the future, you likely envision the remarkable technologies that you've seen in comic books and films. You may begin to picture flying cars, trains driven by electromagnets, or household robots that will see to your every need. While modern scientists agree that many of these inventions are either unlikely or unnecessary, it may surprise you to learn what the future could actually hold. Imagine being able to share your thoughts with millions of people at once, simply by typing them on a keyboard and sending them through the air. Think of what life will be like when all of the many fixtures of an office, including a typewriter and an entire Rolodex, can fit within a device smaller than a loaf of bread. Consider the vacation plans you could make when a single trip on an airplane is all that's needed to visit anywhere on Earth. Yes, the future certainly looks bright, but it isn't without its darker sides. According to some predictions, obesity will likely run rampant, and political corruption will become so commonplace as to be accepted. People with nothing entertaining or informative to say will broadcast their demands for attention, and once beloved performers will become pushers of snake oil. Perhaps worst of all will be the emergence of a deadly and potentially devastating disease. Think of the last time that you contracted influenza. You were likely bedridden for days, having no appetite or desire to play games. Experts predict that by the year 2020, a new virus will rise, spreading from somewhere in Asia to the rest of the world. And with international travel being available to even the most common citizen, a sickness which would have been contained in years past will quickly spread to all corners of the globe. Worse still, the fantastic technology.
That's all I got of it. I know it went on, but that's all that I had, and I couldn't find the rest. I even wrote to the gentleman in Australia, said, where did this come from? Can you track down the authenticity to it? And he said the person who's given that information has been pretty accurate in the past. So I thought that was really interesting. 1956, talking about in 2020, a new disease that would come out of the Far East. So here we are. And just yesterday, I noticed on the news that now they're talking about the flying cars, that they think they've perfected them enough that now they're going to produce, I think, 30,000 of them to be able to sell around the country. Interesting as we go through that. All right, let's pick up the story now where we left off talking about the hurricane season. I thought I'd bring us up to date in light of Hurricane Laura that went through eastern Texas and western Louisiana. Pretty devastating. We went through, as we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks, showing all these storms that's already formed as we went through, and we brought us to Laura and Marco. And then as this morning, this is Tuesday, they have 4 more systems that's coming out into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's quite interesting what we're looking at is that almost the entire eastern seaboard now, at some point in time, has already had a tropical storm warning, and most of the Gulf, with the exception of the west side of Florida, all the way down to Mexico. And we still have 70% of this season to go. So now, this is kind of a pattern of the day by day that I showed you last week, and I want to bring you up to date and show you a couple of analogies of what's going on here. This was last Friday, I believe, or last Saturday, as we were looking through the potential of these 2 storms that were beginning to form to bring them into the Gulf and show how they were going to be side by side. And as we were preparing to do this program last Tuesday, what we thought we would have to do is that when this storm passed through, that eventually was going to come through on a Monday, the first storm, then we would hurry up, get in here, do the program to get it out before the second storm came through that was going to be coming through on Wednesday by that time. This is what it looked like by Saturday night. So we began to get a little concerned that should these 2 begin to form, that we were dead center of where these 2 were actually going to pass on 2 different days, and that's what it looked like. However, by the next morning, the storms began to emerge in a different pattern, moving them further west. So this was what it looked like eventually just before, the day before it was actually going to come in. So by the time we were beginning to tape, the hurricane that they anticipated here that became a Cat 1 went all the way up and it just died out. When it got to the mouth of the river, it just took a left turn, which was absolutely amazing, and then it just stopped. The second hurricane is the one that really created all the problems. This is a picture now. This is actually a Thursday shot. This is the day after. You see it was going through, well, I say the day after because it came through Wednesday night, Thursday morning in the dark hours of it. Here was still a Category 3 as it went through Cameron, came in with crossing the coastline with 150 miles an hour wind. So I'm bringing this up now because as of this morning, there's still over 300,000 people without power, without food, without water, and in many cases, there's even no sanitation or sewage available to them. They got a long way to go, and for many of them, this is going to be years and years and years in recovery. For the power, many of the stations and their substations are destroyed, so they're going to have to build from the ground up. So this is not going to be recovering overnight. This is going to be very similar to the patterns they went through just a few years ago over in Texas and like we went through here with Hurricane Katrina. So I just want to bring this out because it's easy for us to go on with our lives and to forget about those who are in this. So we need to keep them in our mind in prayers to be able to ask God to intercede. So now, excuse me one second. I'm going to show you something here. This is an amazing pattern of what came through here that could have been for New Orleans. This is Hurricane Laura's tracking chart on August 19th, all right? What we're looking at here, August 27th, 2020. So you see that path there? So now watch. Let me black this out a little bit. So I'm going to show you, here comes Hurricane Laura in its top winds. And I'm showing you this for a reason, because I'm going to put another one in here in just a couple minutes, all right? So there's the path that we were looking at. And I only blacked the back out to make it easier to see. So now let's go back now 15 years. I'm going back to Hurricane Rita. Hurricane Rita came in approximately a month after Hurricane Katrina came through here. One of the things I remember about Rita when I was here is that when I came back to the city and there was no power, there's no water, and I was at home, every day my responsibility I felt at that time was to go through and find our brethren, because we hadn't heard from a lot of people in the local church. So here's what I would do. I would get up early in the morning while it's dark, and then I would go get in line with the military, and I would wait my turn and just go through one by one, and I would get ice in the morning, and I would get water, and I get my MREs. And I would try to get a couple extra, and then I would come back in. Then I would work around the house, clearing out trees and straightening things up. When it got too hot to work, I'd get in my car then, and then I would drive around as I could to find the members of the church. And as I would find them, then I could not text out, but I would call when I had opportunity with the phone and reach somebody, because all the cell towers were dead, and let people know I found so-and-so, they're okay, or find out what information, because members would be getting in touch with me, can you go check my home? So that was my pattern for weeks that I would go through here. But on this particular day when Hurricane Rita went through, the one area that did not flood from Katrina got flooded from Rita because of its path. So as I was coming back from gathering all of the supplies that I needed for that day, I saw a lot of gathering in a parking lot. And then as I went through, they had the military coming in, first aid coming in, Red Cross coming in. And then here come these military trucks with these people. And they were wet, they were dirty, they were muddy, and they were rescued because they were the victims like we were a month before. And then as an observer from the outside, I sat and watched. And I'm telling this for a reason, because what we're going to go through in the years ahead as we face tribulation is going to be similar to this. There's going to be people who's going to go through problems, and they're going to lose everything. There are people when they would come in, and they would see one another, and you see them run over, and they would give each other a big hug. And then they would say, had you heard about so-and-so? Did they make it out? And there were some of them, they would say, no, I didn't see them. I hadn't heard from them. And the people would break down in tears, because I was already emotionally charged from what I went through and I was seeing. To see this kind of problem taking place, and how they would wait their turn very patiently to walk up to where they could get a bottle of water. And it's like 100 degrees, the heat index 110. And they got mud all over them, lost everything, because nobody expected this area to flood for Rita because it was going over to Texas. Well, it didn't make it to Texas. It came in a little bit short, and so the tidal surge and the wind just destroyed this particular area where they were coming in from. And I just sat there and I cried, and watching the humanity and the pain and the suffering and the fear of what's taking place. And I thought about that from time to time as I went through, because I went home that afternoon and just emotionally just wiped me out to see that kind of emotion and the kind of loss. So that's what they're facing, and that's what we're going to face from time to time as we go forward, because God's holy word tells us that when these catastrophes take place, they're going to be like the roaring seas. They're going to get worse and worse and worse. And what we're looking at in the times ahead, I don't think any of us can fathom how bad it's going to be when you can lose 25% of a planet at one time, or we have a tithe of the population left in certain areas. It's these kind of things you can't grasp. And I knew I couldn't, but since Hurricane Katrina, I feel like I've got a better feel for it, but even still, I can't grasp that kind of pain and suffering. And the thing that we go through this, God says, in each time He gives us this planet a chance to repent, and it says, and they repent not. So anyway, I'm telling you this now because it's going to be really, really painful. So when I go through this, I'm telling you these things for a reason. And I believe that what God's doing right now is preparing us to be ready for the suffering that's going to be coming on this planet before Christ returns, so that our prayers become more fervent, and more frequent, for thy kingdom come, to cut this time short. And thankfully, God's going to hear his saints. And he says, for the elect's sake, he says, I will cut time short. So I wanted to mention that to you. So now, let's get back to this. All right, so now here we are, back 2005, Hurricane Rita, top winds was 180. Thankfully, it died down before it hit shore. Now, this is what we're looking at of its path. This is an actual track that I just took and copied out from the Weather Channel and put it on top. So look how close that was. And it came in, and it just destroyed everything in its path that was over there. So that was amazing 15 years ago. Thankfully, the God protected New Orleans, because that could have been coming over us just a week ago. All right, so now let's take a look at this. 1 year ago, the second strongest hurricane ever in the Atlantic. All right, that was over on September 6th, right around Labor Day. That's right. Hurricane Dorian, second strongest hurricane ever in the Atlantic. 185-mile-an-hour winds, gusts to 225. So that's the path of what it looked like at a peak of 185 miles per hour. And we remember that well because there was a family of ours that was on one of the islands in the Bahamas that you all and everybody who listened put in a lot of money to help to be able to put a roof back on these people and get them back in their house. And the amazing thing is that family put aside all those repairs, came over to the Daytona Beach feast that we had last year and kept the feast, and then went back and worked on their house. Talk about amazing. What faith that these people had. Just put aside. They said, well, it's going to be here. Let's go do what God says. We'll be back. We'll take care of it after that. But thanks to all of y'all, we were able to raise enough to buy the materials that they needed for the roof, and they actually did the work to get the roof on their house. And it was a mess last year. Now let's take a look 15 years ago. This is Hurricane Katrina. And this was, Danny reminded me through a text just a couple nights ago. He said one of the most profound quotes shouted out by search and rescue and first responders was, leave the dead behind, save the survivors. Because over 1,800 people were dead, and there were people floating in the waters, and they had to leave them there first so they can go get the survivors and then go back and get the victims. Just put together a little video for us. Actually, I haven't even seen this remake of the video. So it's about, I think, 4 minutes long, and then I'll be right back for our program.
What has happened down here is the winds have changed. Clouds roll in from the north and it starts to rain. It rained real hard and it rained for a real long time. 6 feet of water in the streets of Evangeline. River rose all day, the river rose all night. Some people got lost in the flood. Some people got away all right. River busted through, clear down to Black Mines. 6 feet of water in the streets of Evangeline, Louisiana. They're trying to wash us away.
It's hard to imagine the magnitude of what you looked at there. The waters rose and it covered from the Mississippi River to Lake Pontchartrain, from downtown, 60 miles straight on down to the mouth of the river. Every single building was underwater. Unbelievable. Two of our members here who taped with us, both houses were underwater. Clayton's house, who lived in the lower 9th Ward, had a 2-bedroom house. And in his 2-bedroom house, it was in his second floor. Second floor. Well, anyway, we're still here. God's brought us back. And it's for a purpose now that we bring you our programs to warn for what's coming ahead. We covered all the weather for the last 3 weeks, but you know what we haven't covered yet is earthquakes. The Bible talks about in Matthew 24 that there's coming a time but there are going to be earthquakes in diverse places. So we need to be prepared because when these things begin, and there's earthquakes now, believe it or not, but they're small. There's going to be some massive earthquakes that's going to change the shape of the planet that we understand today. So anyway, I just want to bring all these things aware so that we don't become complacent in our responsibility. And as God says, these are all the beginning of sorrows. All right, let's move on now. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Abraham Accord, where the president was able to intercede between Israel and the UAE. Then last week we came about something that took place. Netanyahu welcomes UAE in the cancellation of their anti-Israeli boycott. Talked about how important that step was. All right, we covered that last week. Now this week, this is the third week now, something new. The first Israeli commercial flight into Israel and the UAE took place. That was on Monday, August 31st. And there you see the contingents getting off of the airplane. Interesting thing about this airplane, I couldn't see it on here, is that they have a radar or detector for missiles being shot at them. So when they're flying over, they can detect if they're being shot at by missiles. Now, how'd you like to take a flight like that? I know I traveled for the Feast of Tabernacles, and I don't think I would care for that, knowing that everywhere I was going to, I'd have to be watching in case a missile was going to shoot me out of the sky. But anyway, that's what they had to go through when they flew to the UAE. So those are good news of what's taking place, but there's also a concern coming. This might sound exciting for the church, but it's also alarming for the rest of the world. The Jews are seeking permission to blast the shofar on the Temple Mount. That's right. If they're successful, they said it will be the first time since the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That was 1950 years ago. Just the sheer fact that the Israelis are on the Temple Mount brings along to the many of the Arabs in that part of the world. This is what Psalm says, and this is out of the Israel Bible, Psalm 98, verse 6. He says, with trumpets and blasts of the horn, raise a shout before Hashem, the king, before our God. So what the Sanhedrin has done, they petitioned the government to blow the shofar on the Temple Mount for the first time since the temple's destruction. So according to Ivid Vasoli, the head of the 70 nations who petitioned Prime Minister Netanyahu that the Jews are to only permitted to enter the temple 5 days a week, from Sunday to Thursday. They're not allowed to go on there on Saturday. They're not allowed to go there Friday, which is the Arabs, their Sabbath, the Friday. So this would be the first year that the first day of Rosh Hashanah was on a Saturday and a Sabbath. So this is why they're beginning to petition for that. According to Jewish law, it is forbidden to blow the shofar on the Sabbath except for on the Temple Mount. So since trumpets this year is on the Sabbath, they're submitting this petition. So we submitted a request to permit a group of the Jews to do so, to blow the shofar on the Temple Mount on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, or as we know it, as the Feast of Trumpets. All right, so now, it will be interesting to see if they get it. They've done this in the past and they never got permission. But a lot of things are changing in the Middle East, so we'll see. All right, now let's get on to lawlessness. This is only the beginning of what I'm going to be talking about in the future, because there's so much area here, is that God says before he returns, it's going to be a time. And in the time, God says there will be a time of lawlessness, when God says iniquity will abound. And the word iniquity is another word that God uses for lawlessness. And it takes on many shapes and many patterns and many forms. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about that today. Just last week, we brought out a video showing how, and we talked about what we're going to be beginning to see is growing, well, I call it today vigilantism, of people saying enough is enough. We're going to take the law into our own hands and to begin to protect ourselves. And we began to see that. So there's been bloodshed in people's lives now over the last week. You can take a position, you can take a side, right or wrong. I'm not getting into that. I'm bringing out the law right now and showing you what's going on. In Chicago, over the weekend, 54 shot, 10 killed, and 2 more police officers were shot. In St. Louis, 2 policemen were shot. 1 died. 29-year-old black man with 3 children. He was killed in the line of duty. Then at least 8 more people were shot and 2 others were killed. Columbus, Ohio had multiple shootings. New York City, 25 shot and 4 killed. This is in America. We got more people being killed and shot in America than they have in the Middle East in the middle of their wars. This is across our nation that this is going on just right now. Violence is increasing. If anybody tells you otherwise, they're lying to you, but violence is increasing. But you know what else is increasing? The mindset of people who are beginning to condone and accept the mindset. I got 2 really short videos here I want you to look at because this is inside of churches. Now, we're a small church. Most of the Church of God community is pretty small. But as God allows us to get the word out to more and more people, we will have more people coming into the churches to check us out. We've seen it here in New Orleans where people who we don't know, total strangers, because you're an open church, just come in and walk and sit down to see what's going on. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. And you don't know some of the purpose, but the couple of them we were very concerned about because of the appearance to be, well, I'll just leave it at that. But the appearance wasn't what it should have been. But now, I'm going to show you the mindset inside the church of something that's taken place. Let's play it. They're very short. Let's play the first one.
Catholic Cathedral in Philadelphia. A woman was brutally assaulted in the aisle in the middle of a service. The attack was live streamed to the entire congregation at home in real time. There was no question what happened. It was on videotape. And yet the authorities in Philadelphia concluded it was not a big deal, so they're not pressing charges. Here's the crime they've decided to ignore. It's awful. But think bigger for a moment. What is the effect on the country, on the rest of us, when authorities allow assaults like the one you just saw, open threats and harassment and violence to go unpunished?
Now, he's going off in another area. I wanted to bring it out to show you why you think you're at peace inside of a church, you're not. What's going on now is the emotion now is not only just trying to burn a building down on the outside, is going in the aggravation against the people. This other one is a little, the time place was sooner than this, but take a look. This is in a Catholic church, all right? Let's play that. It's even shorter.
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Unbelievable. That's inside the churches where people just walk in. You notice they're dressed well, just real calm, and all of a sudden just anger bursts out. Now, we know that in the past where people have gone in with guns just to kill people, and that's absolutely evil, and that's going to happen too. But you just don't know the mindset of the people in church now is beginning to change to think that violence is okay, even inside of church, all right? Chicago Times brings out this past weekend. 1 killed, 4 wounded when a gunman opened fires at a pancake house on the 4 South Side, and the report said this is nonsense. The diners were lunching under a tent at Loom's Pancake House on the 4 Southwest side of a bright sunny afternoon when a white Audi pulled up in a parking lot. 3 gunmen got out. walked over to the tent, aimed at the table where the 3 women and 2 men were sitting, fired at least 40 times. They're just sitting there having dinner before jumping back into the car and speeding off, according to the Chicago police. This was noted for a popular place for diners to go following church. So my point is that a lot of this violence is gradually drifting to church, to religion. And that's where a lot of the attacks and the assaults and the COVID now, with all the people talking about you can't focus and do anything, centered around church. So you're going to see more and more of this over the next few years. As things go to the left and go green, there's going to be more and more anger against church, against God. And we're going to see all that coming. Now, over 90 straight days of protests and riots. One shot and killed as a Trump supporter protester clashed in Portland. One person was shot and killed late Saturday in Portland in a large caravan of President Donald Trump supporters and Black Lives Matter protest in the streets, the police said. So we told you this was going to come because the people say enough is enough. The police don't want to take it and stop it. We will. So now you're beginning to see this is only the beginning unless something's done. Now in that picture, pull that picture back up again that you're looking at up there. It says this system cannot be reformed. It must be overthrown. www.therevcom, that's the revolution. In other words, they're not going to stop. This has turned into a revolution. And you look at the ideology of what they're going through, and it's to overturn the government, and they're bringing in their heroes, the people down in Cuba, down in Venezuela, all those government protests where they overthrow the government. That's what they're after, and that's what they're trying to accomplish. So now, I want you to read this, right? This report, right? Let me just read it to you, and I'm going to ask you a question. Police brutality, poverty, unequal opportunity, illiteracy, poor housing. Police Chief Parker, this is from a quote from him. He said, these hurled back and forth as the causes of the race riots. It says, reading this article, the real cause and the powder keg of violence that could explode where you live. All right, you got it? This is a quote from an article that was written. Any idea when? I wish I had one of those clocks, you know, do, all right? Take a guess when this was written. What if I did this, all right? All right, what if I did this now? It was in Los Angeles where this was taking place. All right, I'm looking at my crew here, and they got some bewildered look on their faces too, all right? You might think it's Rodney Dangerfield. Was Rodney King back, you might think it was Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney King back there in that, but it's not. This was written, believe it or not, in a 1965 Plain Truth magazine by Colonel Ted Armstrong. And in it, the article was entitled, The Coming Race Riot. So I'm going to be talking about that in the sermon that I'm going to deliver this Saturday, coming in and talking about lawlessness and some of the things that was prophesied to take place, because he hits the core of a lot of what we're talking about today, and predicted that it was coming. Well, it's here, and we're in the middle of it right now. All righty, separation of God is what brings about lawlessness. John Adams says our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious nation. I've got 2 short videos. One's a little over a minute, and one's about 3 minutes long. And I'm going to use these in the sermon, but I want to bring them here because it shows you the foundation of how come our nation worked and why it's not working today. Let's play the first video.
Some time ago, I had a conversation with a Marxist economist from China. He was coming to the end of a Fulbright fellowship here in Boston. And I asked him if he had learned anything that was surprising or unexpected. And without any hesitation, he said, yeah. I had no idea how critical religion is to the functioning of democracy. The reason why democracy works, he said, is not because the government was designed to oversee what everybody does, but rather democracy works because most people, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the law. And in your past, most Americans attended a church or a synagogue every week, and they were taught there by people who they respected. My friend went on to say that Americans followed these rules because they had come to believe that they weren't just accountable to society, they were accountable to God. My Chinese friend heightened a vague but nagging concern I've harbored inside that as religion loses its influence over the lives of Americans, what will happen to our democracy? Where are the institutions that are going to teach the next generation of Americans that they too need to voluntarily choose to obey the laws? Because if you take away religion, you can't hire enough police.
Take religion, you can't hire enough police. And we're living in a time where they want to defund the police or do away with them altogether. I thought that was an amazing, and that's coming from a lesson from a Marxist. All right, now the second video you're about to see is along the same lines, but he goes into a little bit more explanation about how it comes about. It's about 3 minutes long, and it's well worth watching. Let's play that one.
Can I just maybe make two provocative comments, which are not, they're provocative, but I really believe that they're true. There was a fellow who came to Boston about 10 years ago who was a Marxist economist from China. And he'd gotten a Fulbright scholarship. And he came to Boston to study capitalism and democracy, of all of the arcane topics. And we got to know him very well while he was in Boston. So at the end of his time, we invited him and his wife and child to our home just to have a goodbye dinner. And I asked him, so of all the things you learned about capitalism and democracy while you were here, was there something that was very surprising to you that you just had never thought about before? And with no hesitation, he said, yeah, I never understood how critical religion is to the functioning of free markets and democracy. And I'd never put these things together before, but it's like this guy flies in from Mars, and this is what he sees. And he said, you guys are living on cultural momentum that's actually losing its momentum now. But if you go back 150 or 200 years ago, almost everybody in America on the weekend went to a synagogue or a church. And they were taught there by people who they respected that they should voluntarily follow all the rules, because even if the police did not catch them, God would catch them. And so you've got to be honest. Whenever you make a commitment, honesty requires that you follow through. You got to respect other people's property and never take it from them. Their life and freedom is just as valuable as yours. And he said, because most Americans, most of the time, have voluntarily followed the rules, democracy works. Even if the police don't show up on your doorstep to beat you up, you pay your taxes, because we're conditioned, and the root cause was it was our religions that instilled in us that ethic. Now, he said, you just look around the world where America has gone into a country and just snapped its fingers and said, we want democracy right here and we want it right now. If you don't have a foundation of a religion there, and he said it's not any religion, but it's got to be a religion that teaches those particular rules and has enough power over people's lives that they instinctively follow those rules. If you try to put free markets and democracy into a country that doesn't have that foundation, all you get is chaos. Like Haiti, for example, where they don't have that foundation. We try to impose democracy and free markets, and you just get a complete breakdown of social order. It's what's happened in Russia to a large extent. So my first concern about our system is that if you don't have an instinct, and generally born from a religious tradition amongst the CEOs, to voluntarily follow the rules, capitalism just doesn't work. There is no way that you can police honesty if it doesn't come instinctively for you.
Now, you need to go back and listen to that a couple times. In that little short 3.5 minute video, he has given us the root cause of what's going on. and why there's so many problems going on today. And the sheer fact that he said we're losing our momentum is because we're losing our touch with God. Our grasp to the balance and the foundation of truth has been taken away from us, or we have just literally thrown it away. And that's why you're seeing all of the future attacks going to the church, because it is the single final cause that will stop the revolution from taking place. Because man will serve God rather than man can't be changed. And Satan has to stop that. Otherwise, he can't win. So that's what we're looking at here. And that's why this is the beginning of lawlessness and some of the things that I'll be talking about this Saturday on my sermon on lawlessness. All right, and when we come back now, we're going to go to blowing the shofar and its connection to trumpets. I'm just going to get into the foundation of some of that because we got 2 more weeks for trumpets. We'll talk about a lot more in depth over the next couple weeks. So now let's take a break. Let's take a look at this Labor Day video tying in the Sabbath. Work well, rest well. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I love that beat. Boom, boom, boom. I had to get Clayton in the choir to get you a song on the Sabbath. Boom, 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 boom. You sound like you're a bunch of Pentecostals up here just revving up the Clayton's got a great heart about it. I like to tease with Clayton. All right, let's get back into this before we run out of time. Blowing the shofar and its connection to the Feast of Trumpets. You see the foundation of Leviticus 23 of God's instructions for keeping trumpets. The Lord said to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that say in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, shall you have a Sabbath, a memorial of the blowing of trumpets, and a holy convocation. So you shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord." And we observe that holy day. That is an annual, one of God's 7 annual holy days. It's called the Feast of Trumpets as we keep it. A holy convocation. This year, the Feast of Trumpets falls on September 19th, 2020. That's just a couple Sabbaths away. We'll be keeping the Feast of the Feast of Trumpets right here. So now, let's get into our connection in Joshua. I brought this out in the Sermon of Freedom, July 4th, 1776, and this slide is from the 3rd installment. They had 4 parts. This was the 3rd, God's instructions to Joshua. And we're going to tie in the trumpets now to what they were looking at and what you and I will be looking at before the return of Jesus Christ. The Lord said to Joshua, this is Joshua 6, verse 2, "So I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men and do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry the trumpets of ram's horns in the front of the ark. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets." So now before we see the ark, right, before you see the ark coming in, the trumpets coming in is the warning. So in type, what you're looking at here is before Christ returns, there's going to be the blowing of trumpets before he gets here. But on the 7th day, they go around 7 times. It says, "When you hear them with a long blast of the trumpets, have the whole army give a shout, and then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, every one straight in." So what you're looking at right here, whether we realized it or not, and it might take you some time, go back and read this in the Bible study style, is you're looking at the book of Revelation. So they were literally living in type their lives, the end time scenario that God has reserved for you and I so that we don't do like the children of Israel and fail to enter the promised land. And for us, that is the kingdom of God. So now let's take a look at this, and we're going to tie it into the book of Revelation. So here I have this is the finals, the seals, the trumps, and the last plagues, all tied in. I put them all in a little chart that you're looking at right there. All right, so now here's what we're looking at. All right, 7 trumps. Have the 7 priests carry the 7 trumps or the 7 ram's horns. That's what we're looking at in the book of Revelation. Going on. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. So here you see the 7th trump, you have the 7 last plagues, all tied in together, going around the city in the 7 last times. Before the final fall, the very last trump has the 7 plagues in it. Then you see here, when you hear the sound of the long blast of the trumpets, have the whole army give a shout, and then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go in. So here's what we're looking at, is that at the end time, you see all this taking place. What you're looking at there is actually laid out in the book of Revelation. So if we wanted to see what that means, you go to Revelation. So now let's take a look. Revelation 16, verse 17. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." So you give a long blast and saying, "It is done." All right, that's what we're looking at, the explanation from verse 5 of Joshua. It says, and there came voices from thunders. So now one was a single voice. Now we have voices. So each day is a voice going around, and you have one time around, and the horn would blow. But the 7th time, they're all blowing after they go around 7 times. Look at verse 18. There were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake. All right, such was not seen since the people were upon the earth. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nation fell, and the great Babylon came in and remembered before God. So now, these 3 verses are the explanation of Joshua. So what are we looking at? When you hear them give a long blast of the trumpet. So what are we looking at in Revelation? There came a great voice out of the temple of heaven. Give them a long blast on it. That's one. That's a singular. This is a great voice, a singular, tying it in. Then it goes on to have the whole army give a shout. This is at the end of the 7th. So what are we looking at next in Revelation? There were voices and thunders and lightnings. So when the voices go out, all the thunders and lightnings, and that would be the type of them creating an earthquake type of scenario that would come next. And the wall of the city would collapse. Right? See that in Jericho. So now, Joshua, so now we back to Revelation. And a great earthquake, such was not since the men were upon the earth, and a mighty earthquake so great. So when you see that, them shouting and all the voices, you're seeing that, picturing the time in Revelation where God's going to shake the earth when the angels in heaven are rejoicing because the time is finally coming. And the earth will shake. All right? And it says Jerusalem, the walls are going to fall down. The city's going to be broken up into 3 parts. Well, in Joshua's time, Jericho fell apart and the walls collapsed. So you see the exact scenario of what's taking place here. It says, and the army will go up and everyone straight in. And it's where God says he remembered Babylon, the nations fell, and God brought to remembrance Babylon, so he's going to destroy it all just before the return of Jesus Christ. So now that's in part is what I'm going to go in through in my trumpets sermon. I'm going to be giving the sermon on the Feast of Trumpets in just a couple weeks. We'll explain some more detail talking about the return of Jesus Christ. All righty. Well, that's it. Our program for September 4th. In the mail last week from the Home Office, The Foundation of Scripture by Bobby Weber. So that was a sermon that was delivered right here. In part 3 of The Freedom of Eternity, which was part of what I just showed you in that trumpets. So you want to make sure you get that part 3, and we'll have part 4 coming out just next week. All righty. We also put in the mail this past Monday, the Fall Holy Days September newsletter offering the sermon delivered a couple months ago on propaganda. Because, boy, we live in a nation of propaganda, drawing the analogy to what they went through in pre-war Germany and all the propaganda that was taking place over there. A feast update. Kalamazoo so far is the only change that we've had. We've moved our Kalamazoo site to Syracuse, Indiana, to our own building. And believe me, it's a good choice. It's just a few hours south of Kalamazoo. There probably isn't as much to do in the city, but most of the cities and stuff are shut down anyway. But here you have where it's located and a hotel that's recommended that you can stay in. It's about 15 to 20 minutes away, which is another drawback. But other than that, safety is going to be far greater here in protecting everybody from COVID. If you need more information, I have it here. You get in touch with Chuck Hunt Jr. I have his phone number and his email address. Just freeze this video and give him a call and get in touch. Now, we had a ministerial conference just last Sunday night and talking about our final update before the feast unless an emergency shows up. And one of the things brought out was this. We're doing our best to observe the laws as man gives us. So going to the feast site and coming from the feast site, every state, I believe now, requires you wear a mask. So we ask you to make sure that you wear your mask coming in and out. But while you're in services, just like we hear every Sabbath, it's optional inside of the services. So if you want to wear a mask, fine, wear it. If you don't want to wear it, that's okay too. But the other thing is this, is you need to respect the other's distances because some people are more vulnerable than others. So we are a hugging church, right? It's just natural. You hadn't seen each other for a year, you run up, you give everybody a great big hug. We're asking you, don't do that if the people don't want you to. In other words, if you see somebody's wearing a mask and they do this, stay away. Don't threaten them, all right? Just have respect to one another and everybody will be fine. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make it safe, convenient, and comfortable for everybody. So that's what we're trying to do. So anyhow, I was asked to make that report, and there you have it. All righty, that's about it. Tomorrow, this Sabbath, I'm giving the sermon, The Age of Lawlessness. It says, before the Son of Man comes in, iniquity shall abound. So I'm going to be talking about that. It's just going to be a one part. I'm going to get into more of lawlessness in the future, but I want to lay the impact of the lawlessness and showing how it is the separation of God, which you just saw in two of those videos just now. All righty, I see that's it. Well, there you have it. I thought that was it. That's it for our program today, and as we do every single week, we try to live I need to take a break here. We try to leave you with an uplifting video, and we have another one for you right here. Labor Day. Take a look, and I'll be right back to close our program. Pretty exciting video, huh? I like that. I want to thank Audrey. She spends a lot of time every week trying to find videos for it. You got to go back and you got stuff you can't use. You got to cut out crosses and steeples and you name it. But anyway, it's working. Little by little, they come together. All right, that's it for our program. All right, another program in the can. And as we thank every single week. We thank you for being a part of our program, for helping us financially, prayerfully, and especially for sending these messages to everybody you know. And don't forget, every single week, send them to everybody you know. And they're going to love you for it. Not now, maybe later. Till next week, enjoy your Labor Day, and God be with you.